And yeah, just so everybody knows, this one is going to be recorded, and we're going to record the questions as well. So it's my pleasure to introduce Jennifer Reed, who's a psychiatrist, and she was a full-time faculty member at Penn. And then she just told me she left in 2019, right before the pandemic, and still teaches at Penn, but sees private patients, and also is host of the Reflective Mind podcast. So that's what she's going to talk to us today. And I'm going to be monitoring the chat for questions, but it's a small group, so feel free to chime in. And then, of course, if you want to wait till the end, you can ask your question then as well. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Jennifer. Thank you so much for coming today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you, Hillary, for that lovely introduction. So I'm going to do, a PowerPoint. Bear with me on that, but I think it can be helpful to illustrate and just show some of the visuals. I mean, I really think this talk is primarily going to be broadly, how can we reach out beyond the clinics? How can we reach beyond our offices and be able to share information with those outside? So let me just start this. Can everyone see my, okay, wonderful. So essentially a megaphone for us. What are the different options? I will talk specifically about my podcast and just podcasting in general, but wanted to kind of talk about other strategies we were just describing before we started today, that there are a number of different options, even through Penn, where they're really trying to reach out and recognize that social media is sort of here to stay. And so we need to figure out how can we find the opportunities in it. My email's here, website, and then my sort of IG or Instagram handle. So however you want to reach out, if you have questions about this or more specific, thoughts or concerns, please feel free to reach out. So I'm going to start with the Queen, Dolly, who talks about her quote, "I don't like to give advice. I like to give people information," because everyone's life is different. Everyone's journey is different. And that's really important here. I mean, I think women in academic medicine in particular have a lot of different roles that we're being asked to take on, and we can kind of be left feeling guilty that we're not doing anything perfectly. So the things I'm going to talk about today are really if they appeal to you, if they kind of fit within your journey. I'm certainly not saying we all need to be doing this or accessing these different, modalities in order to share information. They're just options, and I've really enjoyed getting involved with them. So my disclosures, I don't receive any funding or kickback from these different resources. I don't receive any funding from the podcast. I've had some really kooky, companies approach me as far as sponsorship, and it's just not something I'm interested in doing right now. It's sort of a labor of love, and, maybe down the road, I don't know, but won't be getting any sort of funding or kickbacks from any of these resources. Just as I've gone along in my podcast and some writing, I found a lot of really interesting people in medicine and a little bit beyond that are doing really cool things. And I find really helpful to share those with others. I share those with patients, with family members, with colleagues, with trainees. And so these are just some ones I found and hopefully can share with all of you. And then I'll talk a little bit more about disclaimers in a little while, but this is just to say that the views I'm expressing here are really my own, don't represent Penn or any other institution. So just to be clear on that. So CME learning objectives, we all have to have those after engaging in this event. Hopefully you'll be able to improve your patient education by recommending at least one high-quality online resource in your area of specialty. I've found that even having particular podcast episodes, either ones I've recorded myself, really kind of goes through a lecture I've given before or something I commonly talk to patients about, or an interview with someone who knows much more about a topic than I do, who can share information. I've been able to say, hey, check out this episode, and certainly episodes of others' podcasts as well. Identify 2 unique ways to communicate this information. So I'll talk about just different options. And like I said, it comes down to kind of style, what you like to do, what you might want to be involved in creatively, and how you might like to approach this. And then 3, just, 3 recommended strategies to minimize your risk and outreach. We always have to think about that, part of an institution, but also in our own sense, with malpractice, medical legal issues, we need to just be aware of what are some of the risks. So online presence in general. Why bother? So some of the things to consider. For one, really allows and empowers us to take back control because we're already online as physicians. We're on, these are just a few that I pulled up, Health Grades, Rate MDs, Vitals, ZocDoc, on and on and on, all these different reviews, opportunity for people to comment on us, on any number of things about us, hopefully our actual clinical abilities and not, our appearance or what we're wearing that day, but you never know what's out there. So this is a chance for us to sort of, wrangle back control a bit. Being able to highlight key research findings, whether it's within your department, whether it's your own work, or whether it's just really interesting stuff that's out there, and you don't want to have to wait to see which media outlet might pick it up or who might actually share information, and maybe the journal itself doesn't have the impact factor that you would like it to or think it should, this can really be an opportunity to spread that information. I really, like I said, with the educational piece, having different sort of podcast episodes that I've either taken part in or have vetted, I can be able to share these. I'm able to share these with not only the public, but I've shared them with colleagues. I've certainly told residents and other trainees about certain episodes. I had a family friend recently who had a granddaughter who was just hospitalized for a psychiatric issue. And I was able to say, check out this particular podcast with this expert I'd interviewed from Columbia. And I think she sent me this lovely card and said, thank you, that was really informative. So it wasn't me kind of going through it all on the phone. I'm sure I would have missed many details. It just gives you that other opportunity. So I think thinking about what is my goal with being online, what are the different aspects, taking back some control, highlighting research, education. Certainly if you think you're thinking about trying to gain some recognition institutionally, nationally, internationally, you're thinking about eventual promotion. I think we as women in academia always need to be thinking about self-promotion. It's not always something we enjoy, but it is really important because, our peers and others are doing it. And we need to make sure that the important work we're doing and all these years of education are really being highlighted. I think referral sources, I certainly have had referral sources through the podcast or through some of the writing. I think that certainly can be the case and can be useful for you. Also, donor sources, if you really are looking for your department, I think just having more of a presence, someone's daughter says, hey, dad, check out the site, or, hey, grandma, check out the site. There can be really some helpful information passed along and may really be helpful for your own programs. And then really benefiting long-term goal, if you're thinking about a side gig, which it seems like more and more data suggests that many are, different business ventures, speaking opportunities, that are maybe outside of your conferences within your specific scope or your area of practice. If you're interested in writing a book or things like that, I definitely found that when I was sort of sending out a proposal for a nonfiction book, that having some sort of online presence, some writing I could demonstrate already, the podcast, so they know I can be able to speak, that they are we're a little bit more interested in some of those things. So if that's of interest to you, it may not be, and that's absolutely fine. Here's sort of an interesting article in Histopathology of all places, but it talks about social media and academics and research. What are some of the ways that it can be beneficial? A great article. I encourage you to check it out. Some people from Cleveland Clinic and Duke. To see if there's anything there. I'll highlight some key points, but it might be an interesting article to check out. Some of their key points. Certainly a journal's social media presence increases their impact factor. The amount of tweets, I don't even know if they're called tweets anymore, X's, I don't know. The amount of tweets that an article gains is often correlated, with impact and with citations. So it's something that you can kind of, again, boost research you think is really important or that you've done and obviously think is important. Can be helpful for research recruitment, engagement. We always know recruitment is difficult, but so is engagement and longitudinal follow-up. So having some sort of access for people that's right in their hands can be helpful. On Twitter, there are a number of different, or X, there are a number of different things that can be used. Using hashtags, you can really find, if you're working maybe in a really niche area, a way to collaborate even internationally with people doing interesting stuff, having journal clubs or different chats on there, and even crowdsourcing examples for sort of rare illnesses with permission, obviously, for the patients. And they go into that a bit more. I won't talk about it too much, but just some different ways for us to really collaborate more broadly outside of maybe our specific academic institution or outside of sort of the usual voices that might be the loudest. We're able to kind of reach out and find some other interesting information. LinkedIn, a ton of users on there, and right now we're outnumbered. There are, about 60% men on there. It does give you an opportunity to show your CV. You can do a slide share there. So really an interesting way to network. And I think that more and more people are posting different things on there in addition to kind of job search. It can really be a way to network and find out about interesting research, interesting conferences, and even sort of promote some of the work that you're doing. And then YouTube, I mean, it really has such a broad reach. I mean, to that end, my 13-year-old the other day said, Mom, I've finally found a place to access good medical information. And I said, well, do tell. And he said, oh, there was this doctor on YouTube and he has like millions of followers. And so he's going to be able to just really tell me everything I need to know. So we had to talk about that and access, where we're accessing our medical information, but it's out there and you are really able to do, put presentations on there, educational videos. Again, if you wanted to create something that you talk to your patients about every single week and you want to be able to say, take a look at this before you come in to talk about that specific issue or that specific diagnosis, that just can be a nice way to kind of get things started so that the session that you have, very limited time you may have, can be used for highlighting specifics to their case, answering their questions, and then gives them something to kind of have after they leave the appointment if it's just overwhelming to them. My sister, for example, is a breast cancer surgeon, and I think she talks about how little time she really has to work with someone who's first diagnosed with breast cancer, and there's so much information. She did come on my podcast and went through a ton of different stuff there, and so now she can sort of share that with them if she chooses to and wants to highlight her little sister. So who knows? So another interesting article I thought, it's about social media and the advancement of women physicians, and so I think speaks more broadly just to women in academia in general, and really talks about just some of the opportunities. We hear all the time, certainly about Change Healthcare and the sort of, this that they've been sort of breached, and there's been all these issues with social media and certainly the harms of social media. I'm not trying to downplay those whatsoever, but I think there are potential opportunities, which this paper speaks to. So really mentorship and networking, when you interview women in, careers or really working toward leadership roles, it's hard. It can be hard to find mentorship and networking. It may be that there are fewer women in leadership positions, in, academic vice chair and chair positions around the country. And so this just doesn't, you're not as limited by where you're located, or even introductions from those who might be deciding kind of who gets the control or who gets to be mentored or networked. It's open all the time. So those with really hectic schedules can access the support there, access the information there, maybe even provide comments, provide feedback, things like that on their time. And it's nice to have flexibility, we certainly know. And then private groups for sensitive topics, so things like Meta or Facebook, can provide a relatively safe. Again, obviously, we all need to be sort of protecting ourselves and making sure that we're in environments that can be safe. There are these private Facebook groups, for example, that I'm a member of, a number of them, where we still aren't talking about specifics of a patient, but can really sort of crowdsource and talk through different challenges, or even our EMR for a lot of psychiatrists has kind of gone away. So everyone on there was talking about different things he had researched and sharing information. So I'll show that in a bit. But I think this can be a helpful place to talk about some of these sensitive issues. You can do it anonymously on a number of these sites, and just be able to get some support from other women who may have experienced it but aren't in your program. And also, honestly, because data does suggest that women's professional reputations are punished more for speaking out in these areas publicly within their departments, unfortunately. So just thinking about how do we sort of get the support without as much risk to our own professional reputations, though I hope over time this changes. So benefits, again, continuing, disseminate the research as we talked about, promotion, collaboration, finding new people we might want to work with. There was some interesting paper that talked about just kind of biased metrics for productivity for women in academia. Women might be less likely to use self-citations in their work, which can affect their measurement of productivity in some institutions, and they might be penalized for productivity loss. For example, years without publications, maybe when they're on maternity leave, or home caring for an aging adult, or have other kind of caretaking related losses in productivity. And so we need to be finding other ways to promote and really make sure that we're getting our information out there and demonstrating our productivity. And then I think this one's the most important. Advocacy for change can really be created by power, group of like-minded women. So people who are engaged, active, agree with each other, support each other from all over the country, all over the world, I think can really help us make some positive changes for women broadly, women in healthcare and academia in particular. So some different options to reach out. Again, sort of choose your flavor, just put a few different ones on here. if you'd like to write, if you'd like to speak out, if you'd like to kind of create visuals and things, there are just some different options and kind of a general guide, writing a number of different things, personal blogs, blogs through different groups. I'll go through each of these a bit more as we go. Guest essays for different media sources, newspapers, magazines, etc. Op-eds certainly can get you a lot of press in the major national newspapers and such, but there are other opportunities more locally. If you're interested in speaking, having your own podcast is really not that difficult, when you really have a little bit of extra time, as I've had since moving to a home office, but even just going on other people's podcasts, recognizing there's a lot of room there for sort of promotion, but also referrals and educating the public. YouTube, having a YouTube channel or going on someone's YouTube channel. TikTok, who knows what's going to happen with TikTok and sort of the geopolitical challenges that it may be facing in the future, but it certainly is a huge place where so many people are turning to for their medical information. So if you're comfortable sort of navigating TikTok or want to jump on there, it certainly can be helpful. And then visuals, I like to sort of build, I'll show you like pictures of different things that I'm trying to promote. It's fun, it's creative to get to work with it. So those on Instagram, Facebook, and even LinkedIn tend to be where I promote. Maybe if I found an interesting article and I want to put up a little blurb about it so that more people read it, or a podcast episode I've done or been on, or one that I think is really great, I'll certainly create those kinds of visuals. And maybe you like to be, creative and get out there and do that. So just looking at the sort of Penn social media, here are some of the different, it really is on all of these different platforms. It's also on Facebook or Meta. It's also on Twitter or X. These are just a few of the others that pulled up as well. So it's out there. And I think if you had interest in getting more involved, it certainly wouldn't be hard to go in through the Penn, route, or going in through your own independent professional, links that you wanted to create. So we have here like YouTube, YouTube, LinkedIn, Pinterest, Google Plus, Instagram, and like I said, Meta, Facebook, and Twitter. So some different options to get out there and network, or to kind of start, like I said, really being able to build our own narrative online as opposed to being reviewed by patients who might be disgruntled for any number of reasons. Having your own website is certainly one way to go, and there are more and more ways to do this pretty straightforwardly. I built my own website, and I think a number of people have. You can certainly pay someone to do it, but it's much more user-friendly than it previously was. These are a few different providers that I've had either on the podcast, or I just think they're doing really interesting work. Dr. Gillihan, he's affiliated with Penn and has the Think Act Be podcast, talks a lot about CBT and mindfulness. Dr. Narissa Bauer, she does a really cool kind of national ADHD program where families and kids can come on and do different trainings and sort of work on kind of behavioral changes and things with ADHD. And then Kelly Casperson, Dr. Casperson is a urologist who works with women and has written a book about sex and has her own podcast all about sort of sex and menopause and pregnancies and hormones. And it's just really very, very informative and kind of a helpful place. So having things like this, having your own website's nice. You can refer people to it. You can put links on there to something you find helpful or really want to try and promote. And like I said, it's not too hard to build one if you've got a long weekend. If you're on Meta or Facebook, there are things like the Physician Moms groups. You probably have heard of that one. There are individual ones for each city. It seems Philly has one that I've also kind of checking in on, asking a lot of different medical questions, often for their family members, or maybe there's like a crazy rash posted on there and people are asking about it. So you got to go in there. It's not for the faint of heart, but I do think it can be helpful to network. The bottom left one here, Philly Psych, I'm on, that is a private group. So about 270 of us. And that's where we might say, is anyone taking new patients? Does anyone have any, thoughts about this specific diagnosis as far as referral sites? Does anyone know anyone in, Ohio that might be able to see a patient who's moving? So a lot of different places and just for support and frankly, silly memes sometimes just to kind of get people through. So different writing opportunities. There are a number. Op-ed, certainly. This one's in the Times. It can be challenging to get something in something as major as the Times or, the Wall Street Journal, but there are a lot of, even Philadelphia Inquirer, other, more local newspapers, even around the country. And doing an op-ed, I think, can be really helpful because people do want to hear from physicians. They do want to hear from people who are doing the research or seeing the patients themselves. And I think can really give us a voice. Some other sites you can contribute, Doximity. So this is an op-ed that I wrote and submitted there, and that really gets a pretty wide audience. The Coalition for Physician Wellbeing, Kevin MD. These are some different places where you can pitch an essay, whether it's a personal essay or it's about an experience you had or you want to raise awareness. And I think especially Kevin MD is really a great habit of trying to promote and publish as many essays as it can from physicians and other writers. So a great way to kind of break into it and try something out and see your words in print, which is pretty fun. A lot of different resources about how to write an op-ed. So just wanted to throw those on there because when I was starting to think about it, I was Googling it. Jane Friedman, the bottom right, does a lot with just how to kind of break in and do some writing, how to write, essays, how to, has these little seminars for like $20 that you can go on and learn about how to write specific types of things, or, how to get published in certain areas if that's of interest to you, how to start a blog, things like that. So there's a lot of different information out there where you can find about just writing an op-ed. And I think, again, it can be really powerful to get a lot of eyes on that. This is the disclaimer that I found for citing university affiliation. So for example, if you are, at Penn and you want to submit an op-ed to, let's say, the New York Times, then you'd want to kind of include this in there so that the opinions expressed do not represent the University of Pennsylvania system, Perelman School of Medicine. I do try and put this kind of on everything, my website, my podcast, different things that I'm writing. We'll probably put it in my book. So just to know that you're kind of following and adhering, so you're not speaking for the university proper. Blogs are another really good way, I think, to get information out there, and there are different media sources that do. Penn does have like all these different blogs. Again, I didn't even know they had all of these when I went in there, but really have a ton of different blogs. I wonder what the fertility blog sounds like right now with everything that's going on politically. So there's really a chance, I think. Oh, I don't know why I have balloons, but a chance to write there. And then I have a blog, but it's on Psychology Today. It's called Think Like a Shrink, and I do post different articles. I'll show you those here in the middle, just a list of some of the different things that I've written about and submitted. So it's something where they do your SEO for you. So sort of your search engine optimization, meaning getting more eyeballs for things that you're reading, more than you probably would with your own personal blog. So I think it's a really neat way to get information out there and, be able to write about things. Like I said, if there's a new paper, like this one on the left, new research talking about insomnia in women who are pregnant. On the right, thinking about women and alcohol use, just some really, key hot button issues that are talked about in the lay press that you might want to get sort of a more clinical, give some clinical input on. So different options to do there. Having a blog that is sort of affiliated with a bigger media outlet or something like that can help with your reach, but isn't necessary. Having your own individual blog. And these are examples. These are ones that I'm sort of cross-referencing. So you don't have to like duplicate your work. If you are writing something somewhere, posting it, you could sort of put it in your own blog and be able to share that. The second one here, Dr. Steinglass, who's an eating disorder specialist, really a terrific interview. And so I put that, linked that into the blog. So again, just different ways that you can, not duplicate your work, but be able to get the word out there. Traditional publishing, certainly a number of providers are getting involved in this. I think having a social media presence helps. You certainly hear that, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary. I do think it can be helpful to start, getting people, an audience familiar with your writing, for example, if this is something you're interested in doing. I also tend to recommend books that I've read and vetted to patients. You may do this already, but I think having a nice, even a small group of books that you feel pretty confidently recommending can be so helpful, because there's just not enough time for us to go through any of this or all of this in our sessions. So how do we actually find information? This is a Come As You Are, terrific sort of sex education book. Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety, just looking at some of the data on nutrition and how it can be helpful for mental health. And then The Sleep Solution, I recommended to a ton of patients from a sleep perspective. Even my own mother, I think she read it, but I don't think she followed through with any of the advice. So, you can bring a horse to water, but. All right, visual images. So these are really fun to make. I mean, I just have to say, this kind of gets into the creative aspect of things. So these are different, for example, interviews where I've had a journalist reach out and say, I have a question about this, or this was just released, or this paper, or do you have any thoughts on this? And so this is how I promote it on Instagram, but it also gives you a chance to kind of get creative and make something. And I think it's just fun to create these. So these I create on something called Canva, Canva. I'll put that on one of the slides later, but just allows you to kind of promote something that you find helpful or important. And then these I tend to post across social media platforms on, X and Meta and Instagram and LinkedIn are probably the ones I tend to post them on as a way to sort of reach broader audiences. Again, some of the other ones that have just been, pieces again that have reached out and asked these questions. And I really feel like it's important for us to get evidence-based information out. So this is one way to do it. Speaking, I go through that one fast. It's a big picture. So advantages of a podcast, which has really been some that have surprised me. I sort of started it during COVID, was stuck at home, feeling like there was so much need and I wasn't able to see as many patients as I'd hoped. My kids kept running in and out of my office, for example. So this was one way to share information, but it's ended up being really fun and kind of surprising ways. So referrals certainly can be helpful, either again, having your own podcast, but also if you want to be a guest on others. There are a lot of good ones out there that are doing good work. Collaboration with peers across the country, across the world. I joke that it's an introvert's dream to host a podcast because I just get all these super interesting, bright people on and they talk about things they're interested in and I can ask them whatever I want for like 45 minutes. And then we're done, and then we all get to rest. So it's just it's been really fun I've learned a ton from some of the guests. I'll talk about them in a minute. Ongoing learning opportunities. I mean, again, I've obviously learned a ton from each of these interviews, and I think it can be a great opportunity. You read a great article or a book that you really like, and you reach out to them and see if they'll come on the podcast. Some people do. I'm often ghosted, but in the end, I've really had some terrific guests. Evidence-based information for patients. Like I said, just different people that have come on. You really know what you're sharing. You can do CME if you have a podcast. You can offer CME. I think CMEify is one people do use so that you are helping your healthcare peers reach their CME goals. It's not something I've been organized enough to set up yet, but is an option. And I know a number of my peers, like Narissa Bauer, who does the ADHD work, has incorporated this into her podcasts and YouTube videos. And everyone needs a creative outlet. I think for me, that was something I recognized in COVID as well, is that I missed anything sort of creative. I just needed an outlet of some kind, and I've enjoyed continuing it. And then truthfully, my kids' friends think that the podcast is cool. So that's probably the most important, but these others are really important too. So just example of some of the guests, the nutritional psychiatrist I talked about, authors of really interesting books, CBT, motherhood, insomnia. This article was so cool. This cannabis researcher from Columbia. I learned a ton about that because every patient I speak to right now is asking me about cannabis. So I refer them to that and also, obviously try to answer their questions. Really people doing things that are inspiring. There's a lot of awful things in the news, so it's nice to be reminded. People are doing art programs in hospitals, improv comedy in hospital systems, and some of the cool stuff, and people that I've connected with. The urologist, Dr. Casperson, I mentioned earlier. This amazing woman from Australia who talked about this feminist theory for female low sexual desire. I highly recommend you check that one out. It was really fascinating. A child and adolescent substance abuse counselor just really trying to reach parents about how to talk to their kids about these issues. And I even interviewed my dad talking about the practice of medicine in rural North Dakota, which was just really fun. And I always have that in the vault. So that part was just cool. So other things, trying to raise awareness, highlighting the helpers. Just wanted to put these three out there. Introspective Spaces, really cool program. An MD and an RN in California who do just different reflective exercises. It's sort of a community to try and support women in healthcare. It's just a really positive space, so something you can check out. Women in White Coats is another program that I think really tries to support women and promote women in medicine, and it does some interesting work. And so there, you can Google their websites, Introspective Spaces, Women in White Coats. And then this third one, just to reflect on, these are a couple of providers from the Harvard Medical System about a paper that I read that I was like, this is great. It's all about bearing the cognitive load and how women carry this intense load of keeping track of absolutely everything. And so trying in that case to highlight a paper that I think was really, really interesting. It may not have had as many views as it should have. And then it's been fun to sort of promote Penn providers. So honestly, if anyone's listening and they really have some cool research and they want to get out and promote it, feel free to reach out to me. I'll have you on my podcast or can recommend another podcast you might want to be on to talk about it. Had Dr. Karlowish, who does really interesting work in Alzheimer's. We talked about his book, which was really fun. A genetic counselor at Penn, who just talked about essentially what does a genetic counselor do and how can we inform families. So another thing that we can really send a lot of our patients to learn about. And then Dr. Sheila Shanmugam does some fascinating work on menopause. And so her coming on and talking about that was really fun. And, when they come on, I just say, look, we're trying to speak to people who maybe are not in medicine, but want to learn about this. And, just kind of the conversation should be very easygoing and talking through some of what you'd like your own family to know about, for example. So I think it's just an opportunity to bring things out of the academic kind of circle and into a broader space where it's sort of main street issues there. And then just, pointing out there are a number of different podcasts from other providers. Flourishing After Addiction, as a colleague of mine that I met in medical school. He, interestingly, is an addiction psychiatrist, but had his own struggle with addiction, really talks about it very openly and does an interesting podcast. So kind of working on some of the stigma and shame around addiction. I think he does a terrific job. Just some other podcasts, again, that I do recommend to people sometimes. I do some sex therapy in my sessions. So the Come As You Are podcast is one I do recommend. Sleep Unplugged is also another good one that people can check out and just find episodes that pertain. How do you make a podcast? Through this sort of quickly. So this is we just interview on Zoom, just like what we're doing here. We hit record, and then in the end, it converts it into an audio link that we can then go and edit. This is Jonathan Reisman, who wrote this really interesting book, Eating Anatomy, and does these eating anatomy dinners around Philly and even around the country, where he serves foods like heart and kidney and liver. And I used to follow his Instagram, but sometimes the photos are a little shocking. So I stopped, but there's really an interesting stuff. But we just, I look like sort of a dork on this one, but we just chat for 45 minutes and then I go through and save and work on it. I usually edit on GarageBand. I've had editors help me with it before. I do kind of like to do my own. Maybe I'm a control freak, but you can have your own intro that you've already created, your outro you've already created that has the disclaimers in that we'll talk about in a minute. And then you can include, put in the new information or the new clip or file from your interview that day. And then I go through and kind of edit out the ums and ahs and try and make sure my guest sounds, as absolutely articulate as possible. That's usually not a problem, but at the same time, I want to make sure that they sound great. And then I host it on something called Buzzsprout. So you can have different hosting sites where you put these different podcasts. You upload it once it's edited, and then you can put in all the different notes down below. You can get a transcript if you want to. You can create a sound bite. It's a lot of different. It's very sort of user friendly. And if I can figure it out, you definitely can. And then you can add to different directories. So you can say, you can check out the podcast on Apple or Spotify, what have you. I think that does give it greater reach. I have it on my website as well, but this is just options for people that use these directories. And then some of the tools I use. So Canva for images, as I mentioned, the Buzzsprout for podcast hosting, Linktree. If you're on Instagram, you can actually post different websites or links on Instagram. So using Linktree, which is a free resource, you just have to have a login, etc. If you see on the right-hand side here, you can go into sort of, I'm sure if you've been on Instagram, you go in to look at, say, a newspaper that wanted you to look at an article, and you click on their Linktree. It just allows you to kind of post links, so to speak, so that people can go to your whatever website or podcast or some other article. And then, like I mentioned, the GarageBand, where I do some of the editing. So just wanted to make sure I take some minutes at the end here for just best practices moving forward. This is sort of a thorough and helpful article that talks about what do we need to watch out for when we're getting involved in social media and we're being out in public that way. Again, like I said, we're already there. We're already online. To be honest, as physicians, we don't have a lot of privacy because patients can rank us in all these different areas. But if we are going to be doing it, what are our best strategies? And I sort of put this sheet up here. I know it's a lot of words, but just so you have the example of this, I think this is a nice summary of all of these things. Just being aware of what you're sharing, what you're liking. Anytime you're on social media, you sort of are representing yourself as a professional. Remember that, anything you author, anything you post, even if you delete it, sort of can still be accessed. So just being aware of that as you go forward. In the end, I ended up, I really don't do a lot of personal social media posting. I don't post my kids on social media. That's a personal choice. That's not something that you may decide is right for you or not. But I had a separate like Instagram account and then a professional account. And in the end, I don't tend to post on the personal one. I just send my sister like dumb memes or something, and that's about the extent. So I just use it really for professional use. So I don't have to worry as much about people like hacking into the other one, which, it isn't that high of a risk, but one I just tend to avoid. And it takes a lot of time to post on social media. So where I was going to put the time in was in the professional side. It's tricky when you're on, say, Facebook, and you might have patients who are trying to connect with you. Certainly, you might want a disclaimer on your site that, if you are my patient, you shouldn't be reaching out to me here. Just information so that they know that this is not the best way to reach you. I don't know if it's really possible to make sure if you've got, 4,000 Facebook friends that none of them are your patients. I think that's going to be digging in a bit deeper than we're going today, but it is something to keep in mind. I haven't found it to be an issue for me, but it's certainly not outside the scope of something we should just be aware of. Avoid providing specific medical advice to non-patients. This gets into the disclaimer I have in my podcast, for example. At the end, I always say, like, thank you for listening. Remember, this is just general information. This doesn't replace your healthcare provider. Please reach out to them with any questions or concerns you have. And I'm sure you've seen that or heard that on different disclosures, but that's important to make that you're able to just demonstrate you've put that on there. Patient privacy, even when we're on things like the Philly Psych, the Facebook post, we really try not to give specific details about someone, keeping it as generic as we can, even though it's a private group. We still have to be aware and try and de-identify as much as possible. And again, keeping personal and professional profiles separate. And I do think that's really important. Like I said, for me, I kind of just stick to the one, but I have had both, and it's very possible to have, for example, a personal Instagram, and you can do a business Instagram account. Ethics, I mean, we just need to always keep in mind that, what we say online is sort of what we're saying in the office, is what we're saying in the staff meeting, is what we're saying in a kind of grand round. So just being aware that you just have to keep professional and not be making any false or misleading claims, even if you have like a new supplement that you're sure, like Dr. Oz, was going to be helpful for everyone. Self-identification, again, specify, as it said in the Penn disclosure, whether or not you're representing an employer. If you are representing Penn, then you have to kind of go through the process and make sure that they are aware of your interaction with the media, for example. So I think it's just always helpful to have this disclaimer in sort of on each of the sites where you're having a social media presence, because you can certainly say that you're affiliated with a location. As I say, I'm affiliated with Penn and with Cooper, but you need to make sure that you're not seen as speaking for them. Can get you into some hot water.
So Jennifer, somebody wants to know how much time you devote to creating, editing, handling social media, managing the website, email list, coordinating with each guest, and at what point is it worth hiring somebody, and how much would that cost?
Yes. Let's see. I mean, I think that it sort of comes in waves. I find this to be a helpful thing to shift over to when I'm really tired of charting or writing notes. I probably, when I'm doing a podcast episode once a week, it's 45 minutes for the interview. It probably takes me another at least, couple hours to edit it and to create the different visuals and things that I want to do. Sometimes I'll do that when I'm like watching basketball or watching TV or something on that. So it's a little bit of a relaxation, but can take, a few hours to do that. I've sort of paused the podcast a bit now because I am trying to finish a book. So I think it can ebb and flow. And the nice thing is you're setting your own deadlines, which I really like. So I don't have to meet anyone else's deadlines. And it might just be that I don't put out a podcast for a few weeks or a month, or I haven't written on my blog for a while. So you really can kind of decide how to do that. There are so many resources for having people do any and all of these things. So depending on, how organized you are and wanting to spend money on it, which you absolutely can, there are people even on something like Fiverr that you can find that will do some podcast editing. Didn't get into different places to look for that, but they absolutely exist. You can find people who even sort of help you, co-write with you. You can find people in PR who will definitely sort of put your face out there and try and get you coverage in different media outlets, whether it's radio, TV, newspaper. So there are a lot of those options. I think it just comes down to your personal choice. I do think you're paying in time or money. I think because I'm not commuting in and out of Philly anymore, I have a bit more time, so I can do that. But I think, you absolutely can pay for these things and do them in a more efficient way, perhaps. So it depends on your desire for control, how willing you are to relinquish that. But I think you can find really terrific people. It just takes time and energy, like finding childcare, right? To find the right person that you trust and feel like can kind of speak in your voice, whether they're your social media person or something like that. So sort of a broad answer, but hope that's helpful. And I think this is the last, slide. So if there are any other questions or concerns, and certainly, like I said, you can reach out to me. I'm doing pretty well for time. So I'll stop the share, I think. Okay, so questions, thoughts, concerns?
Oh, we can't hear you, Lisa. We can't hear you, but if you put it in the chat. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. This was so helpful. Oh, here. Are there monetization opportunities such as advertising in the podcast?
Absolutely. There absolutely are. And it depends on how you're interested in pursuing that. There are some programs for people who are have podcasts who don't have a huge audience, which would be me included at this point, where you can sort of monetize, per listen and can find ways to actually do so even with a smaller audience. As you grow your audience and get bigger, there will be more and more people, who would be willing to come on and provide sponsorship for the podcast. So it's something you can kind of build over time. There are ways to do that. Like I said, even when you are a smaller podcast, maybe it's not as lucrative, but there can be some options there. I have been approached by different companies. It seems like CBD providers really want me to jump on their program. I haven't gotten involved in it just because I haven't had any products I truly believed in or would want to support. And I found it just not something I wanted to pursue at this point. But there absolutely can be any number of monetization opportunities, both with the podcast and then as far as your blog or doing some different writing, like I said, can open doors for speaking opportunities, for guest essay opportunities. I do think it helped to have, like I said, a social media presence to get a book deal for the book I'm working on. So I think it does help indirectly, but there can be direct ways as well if you're savvy and kind of, again, maybe reach out to hire someone to kind of help you with that piece.
And okay, let me get. So another question. Thank you, Dr. Reed. Awesome work. Did you have to request formal permission from Penn before initiating the podcast? If you have Penn providers as guests, must you or they request release from Penn to participate? Is this content your intellectual property, or does Penn need to be involved contractually in some way?
Interesting. So, I think that is something that I'm a little bit separated from it since I'm not on their kind of clinical faculty at this point, and wasn't when I started working on this. So I think that they do not have, access to any sort of, if I were to receive remuneration for this work. I think that I do have to make sure I have those disclosures in, and I disclose that I'm not speaking for them. I have had a number of individuals from different universities come on, and we make sure that they have the disclosures in place as well. And some of them have checked in with their like PR department to make sure that it was okay for them to come on the podcast and even to promote it. So it's always good, I think, to check in with your, if you have a PR team or a media team, and Penn Medicine certainly does, if you have any questions about that. But I've really had people that have been able to come on and speak without a problem. And again, because I'm not affiliated, if I do make royalties on the book sales, eventually those will be my own. When it comes to being true Penn research or clinical faculty, I think it does get a little bit more complex there. So I apologize, I don't know for sure. And it would be something that you'd want to find out about as far as what the royalties would look like for you in different areas when you are a full-time faculty on salary at Penn.
And then somebody else said, thank you so much. This is such interesting work. Have you had any concerns or negative experiences with becoming more publicly recognizable?
Yes, I love that famous is in quotes. No. Uh, No, not necessarily, honestly. I mean, it is something I am aware of. I think it's something I'm aware of as a psychiatrist in general, is just how much of a public image I feel comfortable creating. But I think just really trying to make sure that I'm putting out things that I think are evidence-based, making choices with integrity, that I can really stand behind anything that I'm speaking about. I think that as, you know, for example, when the book comes out, I'm sure there will be any number of trolls who will have comments about it or feedback, or even people have very justifiable negative feedback on it. And so I'm trying to work on thickening my skin as time goes on, but I haven't had any truly negative experiences. It's something that's on my mind, but I think, you know, again, I'm already out there. My information's already out there in a number of ways, especially as a physician. So I know that patients can Google me, can find anything they want. So I want to try and control the narrative with my own information and have them go to my website rather than some kind of random review from 5 years ago. So not necessarily, but you know, it's possible.
And then another question, do you provide any tips to your presenters on how to give an effective presentation? Have 3 key talking points, provide de-identified examples, etc.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I mean, I think the people that have come on, really, I've just tried to reassure them that it's very much a conversation and I want to learn about what they find most interesting. And most of the time, that's the topic we're discussing, right? It's a paper they just spent 6 months on, or it's research they're doing, or you know, Dr. Karlowish was talking about the Penn Memory Center, which he's been a part of for decades. So I think, you know, again, that's why it's so fun is people are coming on really talking about something that's so interesting for them. Otherwise, they really wouldn't probably agree to come on in the first place. I do just say to them, you know, it's just really relaxed. You know, trying, I don't warn them not to talk about any specific patient information. I've had just a few situations where maybe someone has said something that I think could potentially be identifiable. So I've just edited it out as long as it doesn't, you know, cause any issues with the interview. Like I've just, when there's been too many details in there, I've just kind of pulled it out and produced it that way. So again, that's kind of why I like to have some control over the editing process. Um, but if people ask, they've asked me, can you give me a list of questions you might ask on the podcast? And I certainly have sent that before. I like to kind of do a freewheeling conversation. But at the same time, if people are more comfortable with that, I absolutely do that as well. So I think it can kind of be based on what your comfort level is.
That's so wonderful. And I have a question. What's your book about? You don't have to tell us what it's called or anything, but the general.
The book's about women and guilt. It's about how many of us are struggling with guilt and on all of our many roles that we're trying to hold and feeling like we're just not enough in any of them. So kind of some strategies for how to make that better based on, you know, my sort of clinical work over the years. So it's been fun. Writing a book it's a long project. Maybe many of you probably done it. I haven't before, so it's been interesting.
That's fantastic. Is there a lot of research on women and guilt?
No, not really. There's not much research on women and guilt. But to a woman that I've talked to about it and start to describe some of the different things, they've said yes. And then I kind of mention it to men. It's funny, there is a difference. And they're like, what do you mean? By guilt? Yeah, I mean, we all feel guilty if we do something wrong. So I think it's an interesting divide that I'm encountering. It's certainly not, you know, I'm generalizing there, but yeah, there's not a ton of research, but there's a lot of guilt.
Excellent. Yes. And Corey Schreiber said, fabulous. Can't wait for your book.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I've found it really helpful because I certainly feel guilty as like a busy working mom when I'm not doing everything all at once perfectly. So that's helpful. And that's helpful in this whole process as well, is that sometimes you're going to post things and have like one like, or you're going to have like no one listen or what have you. And it just, you start to kind of work on thickening your skin and knowing you can only control what you put out. But I think it's important to know that you do have opportunities to control the narrative somewhat.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I just had one more question because a lot of parents are struggling with children with mental health issues. Is there a good podcast for the kids, not for the parents?
Oh, that's interesting. Um, I don't, I can't think of one off the top of my head, to be honest. There is a book that I've recommended about anxiety in kids that they actually read. I think it's about anxiety as your superpower, something to that effect. If I can find it, I'm happy to post that. So, but yeah, that's a great question. If I do think of one, I'll probably promote it because I think that would be really helpful. And, my kids like to listen to podcasts. Not
Yeah,
mine, of course, but
seems like something you could listen in the car to together or something.
and we've certainly done that. But as far as ones that really, touch on mental health, I think that's a great question. I'm gonna look into that.
Yeah, yeah, so that's great. So I think, Sue, we can stop the recording and thank Jennifer. It was